Hey, Mike Healy here, and I am going to go live. I'm going to try to test out this again, and hopefully I see some guys jumping on here. I try to get this over on my fan page, but more than likely I'm just going to have to download the video off of my regular profile page because I couldn't figure out where the button was on there. But what I want to cover today is I want to do kind of a little not a training, but I want to give you my top 10 recommended business books, especially if you happen to be or if you've ever been in the network marketing space. And they could be in these could be sales books because there's so many principles in here. But because I have a background in direct selling, these are my top 10 books that I wanted to share with you. It was just something I've been thinking about, and I've been wanting to do this for a while. So I'm going to, hey Ed, I see you joined on here. But I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I want to kind of share these with you. So I'm going to try to run through these fairly quick so you're not on here forever. But I think you're going to get a lot out of them, and maybe have a pen and paper handy or just watch this video again so that you can remember the books. That way you can get them, okay? So I'm going to start out with my very first book. This is actually the second book I ever read when I got started in business and networking, and it was... there it is right there. It was called, I don't know if it's reversed on your camera, but it was called Big Al Tells All by Tom Schreiter. Big Al is what it is. And it's a very, very simple, easy to read book. It's got pictures in the whole 9 yards, and it's absolutely outstanding. But I think one of the things that changed my career when I first started public speaking was the close before you start. Okay, and it had to do with why most people buy your product. It was really a script of exactly what, how you said and how you opened up the meeting, and I thought it was fantastic, and I use it all the time, and it was a way that I got the anxiety off of doing a presentation live in front of people. I needed a way to break the ice without feeling intimidated. And the close before you start, it kind of goes like this. It says, most people I talk with join this company because they can A, and I gave a little bullet point. After all, it's only a few $100s or whatever the cost was to join the company, and the only two reasons people don't join the company is they don't really understand our program, or times are so tough that they just can't afford to do it financially. So and what I did is I learned how to script that around the company I was in at the time. And it was really cool because you could just you put that together, and then when you talked in front of the room, it was real easy to just tell people that and close the deal. So the pressure was off everybody. Everybody was easy to understand, and there was no gotcha at the end of the thing, because a lot of people don't know how to ask for the sale at the end. So that's number 10 on my top 10 list of books to see. Now here's number 9. Number 9, maybe you've seen this. It's actually a little tattered. It's Beach Money by Jordan Adler. Beach Money by Jordan Adler. Phenomenal book. I actually know Jordan personally. Jordan Adler actually got started in the first company I was started in I was in the 90s. Was Excel Communications. I think Jordan's actually currently the #1 money earner at Send Out Cards. But he wrote a book called Beach Money where he kind of basically lists his history in here, talks about the things on here. But if you're looking to kind of get a vision of what you should do, of a book that you could read that would really, really help you, it would be this one right here, Beach Money, because it's going to, kind of gives you the rags to riches story of somebody that it has happened for, that failed, eventually succeeded, and it's a phenomenal book. And Jordan's a great quality guy, super awesome guy. So I'd recommend you get that, Beach Money by Jordan Adler. That's number 9. Right, number 8. Number 8 is a great book by Norman Vincent Peale, and it's called The Positive Imaging: The Powerful Way to Change Your Life. Now, if you should be familiar with Norman Vincent Peale. He actually was a minister, and he got really big into using positive imaging and helping people to think positively, because obviously we live in a world that everything's typically negative. Everybody's freaking out about everything every 2 seconds. But he wrote a book that was great. I actually read this book when I took a trip to Florida. My wife and I, we took a trip to Florida. We actually took a month vacation back in January a couple years ago. It was the first time I'd had this book in my hands, and I read it cover to cover, took a lot of notes, wrote some things down in here, and it was a really, really great way to start thinking more positively on some things that I had done. So that's a great book to have. So I think that's number 8, which would lead me to number 7. Number 7 is called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell is a great author, and he writes in the kind of the little phrase here is how little things can make a big difference. And this was something I had to learn in my business career, with pushing through the hard things to making things, when it got tough and you didn't feel like you had any momentum, you didn't have any kind of sales going on or anything like that, of what it takes to get to that tipping point to make it go. And I've used this the things from this book I've used multiple times in multiple trainings on a dry erase board. If you actually just kind of look at the curve of getting your group to a certain level in networking, if you're building a sales organization, how it can eventually tip, okay, and how it eventually takes off. Kind of the law of large numbers, the power of geometric progression, compounding interest, all kind of go along the lines with the tipping point. So this is a great book to read. It's a little thicker, but it might be a good morning read or bathroom read, whatever. Okay, this one, okay, we're moving up a little bit here. This book right here is phenomenal. And the reason I think it's such a phenomenal book is because Influencer, The Power to Change Anything, was written by about 5 authors, most of them psychologists. And I honestly I've read this a ton of times, but I've never made it to the end. I've never made it to the end because I'm still so fascinated with like the first half of the book. I'm sure the last half of the book is fantastic, but one of the things in here that I had to learn, because if you're in business or you're in sales, one of the things that you are always dealing with, your number one thing that you're dealing with, are people. And if you don't know what makes people tick and how they think and how you have to react to people and how you get them to do things, you'll never build a group. You'll never get anybody into any kind of big staying power organization or anything like that. And in this book, there's a couple things in here. One of which that I really, really began to change my business career around with were the things for searching for vital behaviors. And they give some great stories in here. They're not business stories in most cases. One of the most fascinating stories in here was how there was, I believe it was in Vietnam, that I'm trying to make it short. In Vietnam, they had the new king or emperor got on board, and what happened was the new emperor basically did a really cool thing by allowing people to get out of. He released 30,000 prisoners from the Vietnamese prisons that had been in before the current regime. Then what happened was all of these these prisoners that were in prison ended up getting into the mainland. I think it was Thailand. I'm sorry, it wasn't Vietnam. It was Thailand, and spread AIDS all over the country. And literally within a few years, the majority of people in Thailand had AIDS, and they couldn't figure out what happened or where it came from, and they identified this. So then they had to figure out what had happened is all of these people, these prisoners that had gone out, started going and hanging out with the local prostitutes and stuff like that over there, and AIDS spread like crazy, and they couldn't figure out how to combat it. And they identified vital behaviors that they had to start getting people to learn and getting people to understand that changed the way they started thinking and doing things, behaving. And literally within a couple of years, they flipped it completely around. So you can use that. And then the other really, really good one in here was how to create vicarious experiences because of how people learn. Vicarious experiences literally means it's a way that somebody experiences, like through a story. You can tell a story, you get emotional about somebody telling a really good story. That's called a vicarious experience. And if you learn how to do that, you can really, really blow your business up because you can communicate your message much more powerfully and much more effectively by using a right story. So that's another great one. I think I'm down to my top 5 now. Okay, next one. Number 5. How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling by Frank Bettiger. It doesn't look like it's spelled that way, and again, it might be flipped over on your camera here. How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling by Frank Bettiger. This was written back, I believe, in the 30s, but it is absolutely phenomenal and completely current to what you need to be watching or reading today, all of the principles in here. In fact, the very first chapter of this book will change your life because it deals with enthusiasm. And I've used this not only in my own life, but I've used this to train my kids up. My sons both play football. My older son, is a quarterback. He's starting quarterback for a D1 high school here in Ohio, which is huge. And I made him read this chapter on enthusiasm about, and he started basically, he was I think about the fifth string when he was a sophomore, and here he is now starting quarterback. And a lot of those things had to do with learning to change the way your enthusiasm was. But everything in this book is easy to read. They're very simple stories. But I would recommend you get this on how I raised myself from failure to success in selling by Frank Bettiger. What are we at? We're at number 4. Number 4 out of my top 10 books you need to read. Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. I would highly recommend that you get this on audio as well. You can get the audio version probably of any of these books, but the Slight Edge audio version is really good because of the intro. There's a 30-minute intro that Jeff Olson does where he tells a story about where he came up with this book and the concept and everything like that. And it's spectacular. I mean, it's absolutely spectacular what this book is about, because the Slight Edge literally means those little tiny things that these little tiny things that people are doing in their life and their career make the most difference. He talks about how you don't become overweight because you eat a giant cake. You become overweight because you do these little slight edge things of eating one scoop of ice cream every day or one bowl of ice cream every night before bed, that kind of thing. So it's a tremendous book, and it's very easy to read. And obviously, I would recommend the audio on this. So make sure you get that. All right, number 3 out of my top 10. This one's really easy to read because look how thin that is. And it's called Listening for Success by Steve Shapiro. The Listening for Success by Steve Shapiro was given to me by a $1 million producer and a company I was in. I was in that category as well. And I saw him reading this and I was, well, what is that? And he said, this book is tremendous, and I was like, okay. And obviously what Listening for Success means is, can you guess? It really helps you to understand the significance of learning to listen versus talking all the time. Because that was something, and sometimes when you get nervous, you talk a lot, and sometimes when you want to feel more important or empowered or quote unquote knowledgeable, you're always talking more than you're listening. And when I learned how to be a good listener, everything turned around for me in my business, because what I learned how to do was I learned how to finally ask a couple questions and then listen. And by the time the presentations were over or the meetings or anything like that or whatever, people just loved me. And it was so funny because I didn't say anything profound or anything, really a whole lot of stuff. In fact, one of my favorite stories is I went and met with a guy that I was going to talk to, and this guy, he literally talked. I walked into his office, I sat down, I had just about 2 minutes worth of idle chit chat, and he talked. I asked him 2 questions and he talked for 45 minutes straight, 45 minutes straight. I literally maybe in that 45 minutes said yes just so he could tell I still had a pulse and I was smiling and listening and stuff like that. And at the end of it, he just said, well, you know what, this is, I really think we need to do what you're doing. We're gonna sign up. And I literally didn't give any presentation, nothing. The guy just needed somebody to listen to apparently, and so it was great. And I wouldn't have known that, and it was a huge sale commission wise. I wouldn't have known it if I didn't listen to that right here. Okay, we're in our top 2 books that you have to have, especially in business or in networking. And this one right here is called Bringing Out the Best in People by Alan Loy McGinnis. Alan Loy McGinnis, very easy to read, small little chapters. But in business, we are constantly dealing with people, both at all times. And this one right here, Bringing Out the Best in People, is spectacular because it teaches you the psychology of how to talk to people, what makes them tick, how to get people to give you their ideas, or you could have an idea, but how to basically, and I'm not saying being manipulative, but how you can have an idea that you really want everybody to embrace, how you can get it to be their idea without them realizing they do it, and taking ownership of it to really build the thing. So this is a tremendous book that I would highly recommend, and so on. All right, my number 1 book that I would recommend you get, especially if you're in networking or you're looking to do business on a bigger scale, And I'm going to give you this story before I tell you what my number one book is. I have to give you the story first because it's number one. Because of one of these reasons is back in 1994 I joined a networking company called Excel Communications, and while I was in that company, I drove to Atlanta with a group of guys. There's about 5 of us to go to a training, to go to a meeting, and really enjoyed it, and it was awesome. And on the way back, one of the guys that I was with that drove us was good friends with the number one money earner. The number one money earner in Excel at the time was the $1 Million Man, Paul Orbison. And Paul, we all knew who he was, and we'd seen him in the magazines, but I had personally at this time had never met him personally or in person. These guys had actually gone to school with him, high school and stuff, so they knew who he was and so on. So on the way back from Atlanta to Ohio, where I live, my friend Chris calls Paul up and says, "Hey, can we come over?" We come over to his house. We sit down. I'm just enamored by this guy's glory that's pouring off of his body that I thought was going to be there. But literally what was funny is when he answered the door, I'm expecting this guy to walk in with a crown and a robe and a scepter. And he was a normal guy. He had a t-shirt on. He hadn't shaved in a couple days. He had a chew in, like that, dip. If you know Paul or know of him, that was just who he was, a good old boy from Kentucky. He had sweatpants on and he had tube socks on, and one of them was doing the floppy deal. That is a true story. While we were sitting there, I had the chance to ask him and interview him a little bit about what his, what he did. I knew he was a school teacher, but most importantly, he had a bunch of books behind him. And I, at this time, had just coming out of the bar business. I'd never read a book in my life. I literally had never read a book in my life, besides probably, Sue and Spot Learn to Read or whatever those guys were in third grade. And what happened was, I started asking him some. I said, "Well, I'm just getting started. I'd love to know how this works and everything like that. Would you mind, giving me a suggestion of what I could read?" So Paul gets up off the chair, and he walks over to his bookshelf, and he pulls out this book right here by Art Williams called A.L. Williams, All You Can Do Is All You Can Do, But All You Can Do Is Enough. And he walks over to me with it, and his was all beat up and tattered and had tape on it and everything like that. And he goes, "Mike, this here's the Bible in network marketing. You need to go get yourself a copy and read it as fast as possible." And that was literally, that's how he said it. And I went the next day and I bought this book. I was still in the bar business at the time. I read the chapter on burning your bridges. I quit my job bartending to go full-time in network marketing. And just the principles that I learned in this book, and I continue to learn and continue to share with people, had literally changed my life. They literally changed my life. And it can apply to anything. If you don't know who Art Williams is, you should by now. If you follow me or you're friends with me, you probably know who Art Williams is. But if you don't, Art Williams created one of the largest privately held insurance companies back, I think it was in the 70s. And, it became a multi-billionaire company. It was multi-billion. It was larger than any of the other big insurance companies combined. And they did it from a grassroots, kind of almost a direct selling model with it. One of the greatest success stories of all time. And it's just a fascinating read to go through and hear his story and understand, because more importantly, he was a football coach that basically became this giant insurance mogul. And what he does is he relates to all these things and tells people exactly what's out there and what they how they can succeed and things like that. And if you have never read this book, you need to go get it, even if you're not in sales, just because it'll really encourage you with what people can what you can do with your life. If you have the right direction and a little know-how and a little belief. Okay, so those were my top 10 books. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. I've been wanting to do another Facebook Live. I think I've only done a couple of these so far. And, hopefully you can share it with people. Let me know if you've got a book. I read hundreds and hundreds of other books out here, and that was just kind of me quickly grabbing what I thought off the top of my head. If somebody asked me that question, what my top 10 books to read would be, that's where it is. Because typically you can find out what a person's made of or how they became who they are based on what they ingest, what they read, and so on. Because you can literally learn and learn to be somebody through some of these great books. Okay, so hey, any of those books can be read simultaneously. I usually read 3 or 4 books at a time. I'll read like one chapter of one book, put it down, read another chapter, another one, depending on what my what I need to apply in my life and what has to happen that that I'm dealing with. Whether it's business, life, spiritual, and so on, and maybe I'll do another top 10 books on some of the Bible-based books or stuff that I like as well. So, Hey, thanks for being on here. I see I got a handful of people that joined me on here. I'm doing this in the middle of the day on a Friday when I'm actually filming this, so I didn't expect a lot of people to be on here, so it's a little less intimidating to kind of go through and give one of these a shot. So I see you guys on here. So thanks again. I'm going to jump off of here. Go ahead and share this video, like it, comment on it, put your favorite book down below, or any of the books that I've mentioned on here. If you've read them, maybe put a little comment down there of what you thought of them, what you pulled out of them that was so good for you, so other people can read those as well. So thanks again for being on here, and peace. I'm out.